USS Preston was a Mahan-class destroyer that served in the United States Navy both before and during the Second World War. She was the fifth naval vessel to bear the name in honor of Lieutenant Samuel W. Preston. Preston was laid down on the 27th of October 1934 at the Mare Island Navy Yard in Vallejo, California. She was launched on the 22nd of April 1936, sponsored by Mrs. Edward H. Campbell, and officially commissioned on the 27th of October 1936. The Mahan-class introduced upgrades over earlier destroyers, including 12 torpedo tubes, superimposed gun mounts, and auxiliary generators for emergencies. Standard displacement was around 1,500 tons. The class also debuted a new steam propulsion system that blended higher pressure and temperature with a lighter, more efficient turbine design, simpler and more reliable than those in previous classes, and widely adopted in later wartime U.S. destroyers. The Mahan-class destroyers were armed with a main battery of 5 dual-purpose 5-inch 38 caliber guns, directed by the Mark 33 gunfire control system. Their anti-aircraft armament included 4 water-cooled 50 caliber machine guns. They carried 3 quadruple torpedo tube mounts, totaling 12 21-inch torpedo tubes, controlled by the Mark 27 torpedo fire control system. Initially armed with Mark 11 or Mark 12 torpedoes, these were replaced by the improved Mark 15 torpedo starting in 1938. Depth charge roll-off racks were mounted on the stern. After completing her shakedown cruise, Preston briefly served under the Chief of Naval Operations before joining the Battle Force U.S. Fleet. Originally part of Destroyer Squadron 2, she was later reassigned to Desron 5, participating in peacetime training operations throughout the Pacific until December 7, 1941. In early 1942, the Mahan-class destroyers began receiving wartime armament upgrades to bolster their light anti-aircraft defenses. Like other 5-gun destroyers, this refit typically removed the No. 3 5-inch gun mount and replaced it with 2 twin Bofors 40mm guns. Trading 20% of the surface gun battery was preferable to sacrificing a third of the torpedo tubes. Between 4 and 7 20mm Oerlikon cannons were usually added, with 3 placed ahead of the bridge and 2 flanking the second funnel. Due to early shortages of Bofors mounts, most ships in the class weren't fully upgraded until 1944, leading to temporary installation of Oerlikons in their place during 1942 and 1943. To offset the added weight, structural changes included cutting back bridge wings, replacing the tripod foremast with a pole mast, and removing several components such as the mainmast, torpedo tube blast shields, aft gun shelter, and the potato locker. Preston remained in the Eastern Pacific on patrol and coastal escort duty along the West Coast until June 1, 1942. She then set a westward course, screening the aircraft carrier Saratoga en route to Hawaii. Arriving on June 6th, her group, Task Group 11.1, departed the following day to rendezvous with Task Force 17 and deliver aircraft, pilots, and supplies to the carriers Enterprise and Hornet as they refueled and recovered in the aftermath of the Battle of Midway. Preston returned to Pearl Harbor on June 13th and spent the next 4 months conducting type exercises, patrols, and escort missions throughout the Hawaiian area. She joined Task Force 16 on October 4th and departed for the Solomon Islands on October 15th. During the Battle of the Santa Cruz Islands, Preston, serving in the carrier screen, fired her guns in combat for the first time. She shot down 2 enemy planes, sustained no damage, and withdrew safely to Noumea. After rearming, she set course once more for the Solomons to face her second and final battle. On the evening of November 14th, Preston joined TF-64 as it moved along the western end of Guadalcanal to intercept another Japanese push down the slot, aimed at bombarding Henderson Field and landing reinforcements. Maneuvering around Savo Island, the force, 2 battleships leading 4 destroyers, entered the channel between Savo and Cape Esperance. At 2300, battleship Washington detected the Japanese cruiser Sendai on radar, and at 2317, the Third Battle of Savo Island commenced. Sendai, shadowed by the destroyer Shikanami, had been trailing the American force under the cover of darkness until the thunderous roar of 16-inch shells from the American battleships shattered the night and forced them to break off. But the lull was brief. Moments later, the battle reignited with deadly ferocity. The Japanese formation, though scattered, surged back into the fight. From the shadows along the southern edge of Savo Island, enemy destroyers crept forward like wolves, slipping into the maelstrom. USS Benham and Preston moved to intercept, engines roaring as they raced toward the flash of gunfire. USS Gwin, still firing star shells to light the chaos, suddenly found herself staring down the long, gleaming silhouette of the cruiser Nagara, flanked by 4 Japanese destroyers bearing down with lethal intent, and beyond them ghostly outlines of heavier Japanese warships loomed, closing the distance, preparing to strike. The American destroyers, clustered together in the heart of the battle, were now exposed and hunted. Then, just 8 minutes after the first clash, the storm broke. A shell screamed through the dark and slammed into USS Walker. Fire erupted, steel tore apart, and the sea was lit with the deadly glow of exploding ordnance. The destroyers had been found, and the night was just beginning. Moments later, the destroyer Preston locked onto a suddenly illuminated silhouette, a hostile shape emerging from the dark, and unleashed a burst of fire. But the enemy was ready. From the shadows came the cold, calculated reply of the light cruiser Nagara. Using the telltale flashes of Preston's 5-inch guns as her guide, Nagara struck with ruthless precision. The first salvo straddled Preston, geysers of water erupting to port and starboard. The second struck home. Explosions tore through her hull just as her crew scrambled to ready the torpedoes. The force of the impact silenced both fire rooms in an instant, plunging the ship into darkness. Her aft stack was ripped away, crashing down in a tangle of twisted metal as fire and steam belched from her broken midsection. Preston staggered in the water, crippled, caught mid-strike. Her blow never landed. The blaze aboard Preston lit her up like a beacon in the night, turning her into a perfect target amid the chaos. Shells came screaming in from both port and starboard, slamming into her with merciless precision. Trapped in a deadly crossfire, her crew fought to return fire, but confusion reigned. From the port side, new salvos tore into the destroyer, and a grim suspicion crept in. Some of those rounds may have come from a friendly gun, possibly even the battleship Washington, now looming somewhere off Preston's port quarter. To make matters worse, one of Preston's gun mounts had jammed in the fury of battle. The mount hung low, dragging her aim, and may have contributed to the fog of war that now enveloped the fleet. Under the withering barrage and cloaked in smoke and flame, Preston reeled. Friend and foe blurred in the chaos, and she paid the price for it. As the shattered Preston drifted to a stop, barely afloat, Nagara struck again. Her next salvo found the destroyer's aft section, and the result was apocalyptic. One or more shells slammed directly into the rear 5-inch magazine. In a single instant, the stern erupted in a fireball of incandescent fury. The explosion tore through the ship's spine, sending metal, flame, and death hurtling into the night sky. Fireman Robert B. Reed, on damage control duty amid the chaos, later described a vision from hell. The torpedoes, stored near the blast zone, had been pulverized by the detonation. Loose and ruptured torpedo warheads were rolling around under the mounts, he recalled, with the exposed TNT on fire. The deck had become a furnace of twisted steel and scattered death. As Reed staggered to his feet, dazed by the shockwave, he looked up and witnessed a surreal rain of destruction. Canned goods, potatoes, cabbage, and all manner of food provisions were falling straight down out of the sky, flung skyward by the raw force of the magazine explosion. The flames raged on, unchecked, clawing their way forward as Preston burned from within, her fate sealed in moments. At 23:36, with flames engulfing her decks and explosions echoing from within, the order came. Preston was to be abandoned. Her surviving crew scrambled over the rails, leaping into the black, oil-slicked sea as their ship began her final death throes. Minutes later, she rolled hard to port, listing grotesquely. Then, with a shudder, she paused, her bow rising high against the night sky like a gravestone, before slipping beneath the waves, vanishing into the depths, and taking 116 souls with her. But not all had been left to chance. In a moment of foresight before the battle, Preston's captain, Max C. Storms, had ordered all Tetral boosters removed from the ship's depth charges and cast overboard, ensuring that if she sank, her own weapons wouldn't turn the sea into a boiling grave for those who survived. It was a decision that spared many from an even darker fate. Yet fate remained cruel. As the dazed and bleeding survivors clung to debris and bobbed in the frigid waters, a towering shape emerged from the gloom, the battleship South Dakota, racing through the inferno-churned sea, unaware. She plowed directly through the cluster of men. A life raft was reportedly thrown from her deck in a fleeting gesture of hope, but for Captain Storms, there was no rescue. He was never seen again after the behemoth passed. The ship he led was gone. Now, he was too. The night raged on. Gwyn, Walk, and Benham were all battered into ruin, their hulls torn open by shell and fire. Moments after Preston slipped beneath the waves, Walk too succumbed, ripped apart and dragged down into the dark waters of Savo Sound, where flames marked the resting place of brave men. With chaos mounting and casualties rising, the last two American destroyers were ordered to break off and withdraw. But even retreat brought no reprieve. Benham, her bow nearly severed, lingered for hours before finally sinking the next day, November 15th. Then came the battle's brutal crescendo. As the shattered destroyer screen fell away, South Dakota surged forward into the crucible. Caught in the blaze of enemy searchlights, she became a magnet for gunfire, hammered by salvo after salvo from the converging Japanese fleet. Shells raked her superstructure, knocking out radar, communications, and power, yet she refused to fall. And then, out of the shadows, Washington emerged, silent and unseen. In a moment of calculated fury, she opened fire. Her 16-inch guns roared in synchronized thunder, slamming round after round into the Kirishima, the pride of the Japanese bombardment force. Within minutes, the enemy battleship was reduced to a blazing wreck, her hull torn apart, her fate sealed. Washington remained untouched, a ghost in the dark that had struck with godlike precision. Though the Japanese had bloodied the Americans and sent multiple ships to the bottom, their victory was hollow. Kirishima lay dead beneath the waves. A destroyer had been lost. And most critical of all, their mission to annihilate Henderson Field was in ruins. The Americans had paid dearly, but the field still stood. The Japanese bombardment force had failed.